Hello, I am Jordan, and today I wanted to wrap up my thoughts on Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. This started out as a read along I was going to do with Steve Donahue, but for various reasons, Steve did not end up joining me for this, which is fine. Um, and rather than kind of trying to spread this out over the course of the month, which was the original plan, I just don't think I had the charisma to carry that. So I'm going to make a single video now wrapping up the remainder of the book. I covered book one in my last video, and this will basically just be about the book as a whole. I wanted to get to this last week, but it just didn't happen, so I'm getting to it now. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that I really, really enjoyed this. As I was saying in my thoughts on book one, Bede has such an engaging style as a writer. He has such an unpretentious, simple, and simple-hearted way of writing and way of approaching his subject matter, which I suppose is to be expected given his life as a scholar and a monk. It's kind of predictable, I suppose, that he would view the world through such honest and perhaps naive lenses, but I think not every writer could communicate that attitude as well as Bede does, and as few of words as Bede does, if that makes sense. He was a very economical writer, it seems. He packs a lot of information into this book, but it never becomes dry. Well, it does become dry, and I'll be getting to that. But for the most part, it's an extremely engaging book, and I found myself really enjoying reading it in ways that I perhaps wouldn't have guessed. I found it comforting, if that makes sense. Which is not to say that I buy into all of the various fantastical stories of saints and men of God that are in this book, but Bede's devotion to them and his simplistic understanding of them and his refusal to be cynical and his just his kind of honesty is really refreshing and really inspiring to return to, if that makes sense. It's kind of like, it's just very wholesome. It's a very, very wholesome book. And his style of writing is so entertaining. He was just such a gifted storyteller, and he used it to. He repeatedly talks about how the stories he's telling and the miracles that he's relating are for instructional purposes, right? He wanted to strengthen people's faith. And while I can't say it did that for me, obviously, and I think you'd have to be a very old school, devout brand of Catholic in order for this to do that for you, it does kind of put you in a world that feels very, very wholesome and good. And I also wanted to give just a kind of brief example of how engaging of a storyteller he is and how economical of a storyteller he is. I did give an example in my last video, which I still think might be my favorite passage in the book, but I wanted to give another example here. This is him writing about a poet whose name was Caedmon, and based on the footnotes, this poet is now totally lost. We have nothing of his, but apparently he was well thought of, and apparently he wrote a lot. And this is an account of his death. Near the end of his life, he asked to be taken to what's kind of a sick house or a hospital, despite the fact that he wasn't showing any symptoms, which kind of confused some people. So it says, So Caedmon went to the house and conversed and jested cheerfully with those who were already there. And when it was past midnight, he asked, Is the Eucharist in the house? Why do you want the Eucharist? They inquired. You are not likely to die yet, when you are talking so cheerfully to us, and seem to be in perfect health. Nevertheless, he said, Bring me the Eucharist. And taking it in his hands, Caedmon asked whether they were all charitably disposed towards him, and whether they had any complaint or ill feeling against him. They replied that they were all most kindly disposed towards him and free from all bitterness. Then, in turn, they asked him to clear his heart of bitterness towards them. At once he answered, Dear sons, my heart is at peace with all the servants of God. Then, when he had fortified himself with the heavenly viaticum, he prepared to enter the other life, and asked how long it would be before the brothers were roused to sing God's praises in the night office. Not long, they replied. Good, then let us wait until then, he answered. And signing himself with the holy cross, he laid his head on the pillow and passed away quietly in his sleep. So, having served God with a simple and pure mind, and with tranquil devotion, he left the world and departed to his presence by a tranquil death. His tongue, which had sung so many inspiring verses in praise of his Maker, uttered its last words in his praise as he signed himself with the cross and commended his soul into his hands. Which is just a charming, lovely little story, I think, and this book is full of them. There are a lot of miracle stories in here, and surprisingly, at least for me, they never get old. They are all fascinating. Some of them are humorous in ways that I think Bede kind of was aware of, maybe, although I don't think um, he was not capable of irony, just because he was such an honest, good-hearted person, it seems. But nevertheless, there are moments um, that are funny in a very non-ironic kind of way, in a very earnest kind of way. It's a very earnest book. I think that would be perhaps my best adjective for it. But yeah, like I said, I'd say it's 50% miracle stories, which is fine with me. I thought they were all really, really engaging and fascinating, and sometimes beautiful. Um, but if there is a kind of overall overarching theme to the book, other than the fact that it's ecclesiastical history, what he keeps returning to is like a pet obsession of his, which is the celebration of Easter and when is the proper time to do it. Apparently, at this time there was some controversy, or at least in the decades up to or leading up to Bede's time, there was some serious controversy over when Easter was supposed to be celebrated. And Bede gets into great technical detail on why his way is correct, why the Catholic way is correct, rather than, I suppose it's the Irish. The Irish are celebrating it in a way that he disapproved of. So there is a lot of that, especially near the end when it kind of finally becomes resolved. It gets extremely technical and extremely dry, and it really just grinds the entire narrative to a halt. But even that, it's kind of charming because what you're getting is um, like I said, kind of the endearing quirk of a man who you really enjoy spending time with, if that makes sense. Bede was great company, so I'm happy to indulge his obsession with this topic. And to be fair, I'm sure it wasn't him alone. I'm sure it was very much on the minds of his entire community at the time. But in retrospect, it has very little interest to, I think, most people, certainly to me. So the Easter aspect was tiresome for sure. But beyond that, it is a wonderful book. Again, I don't know. I'm not a historian, so I can't speak to its accuracy, but from what I've read from the introduction to this book, um, he is considered fairly credible in his general story of the English people, and that has its own fascinating twists and turns too, especially in the fact that the Irish were largely responsible for preserving the faith when it was constantly reverting back to paganism amongst the peoples of the Greater Island. So that was interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of backsliding, a lot of apostate rulers. It takes a long time for the entire island to become Christian, which is kind of fascinating, a fascinating story in itself, kind of demonstrating the way that paganism really held on for quite a while in this area and beyond. But yeah, it's a fantastic book, highly enjoyable. Like I said, I found myself really wanting to get back to it because it just represents such a simplistic and lovely and charming and good-hearted kind of worldview, which was always a joy to return to. So I highly recommend reading this if you haven't before. And for those of you who were reading this along with me, looking forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. So thank you for watching, and have a good day.